The man who signed away the Cherokee Nation believed he was saving it. To his people, he was a traitor who sold their ancestral homeland for a handful of silver. To himself, he was a pragmatist making a deal with the devil to prevent the utter annihilation of his race. His name was Elias Boudinot, and his story is a dark mirror held up to the American promise, a story not of good versus evil, but of one impossible choice stacked upon another, ending in blood. To understand his choice, you must first understand the man. He was not born Elias Boudinot. He was born Galagina Wati, the Buck, in the heart of the Cherokee Nation in what is now Georgia. But he was a man of two worlds. Educated in mission schools in Connecticut, he became a devout Christian and a polished intellectual. He took the name of his white benefactor, a president of the Continental Congress, as a symbol of his belief that the Cherokee people could not only survive alongside the United States, but thrive as a civilized, sovereign nation. He was the living embodiment of that dream. In 1828, he became the editor of the first-ever Native American newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, printed in both English and the new Cherokee syllabary created by Sequoyah. The paper's masthead read, "Protection." It was a declaration to the world. We are not savages. We have a written language, a constitution modeled on America's own, a government, farms, and laws. We have done everything you asked of us. Now leave us in peace. But peace was a currency with no value in the state of Georgia. Gold had been discovered on Cherokee land, and the hunger for it was insatiable. The Georgia legislature passed laws stripping the Cherokee of all their rights, nullifying their constitution, and forbidding their council from meeting. It became illegal for a Cherokee to testify against a white man in court, effectively giving Georgians a license to steal, assault, and even kill with impunity. A state-sponsored lottery was held, giving away Cherokee farms and homes to white settlers, often while the Cherokee families were still living in them. The Cherokee Nation was being suffocated. Elias Boudinot, through the pages of the Phoenix, chronicled this slow-motion destruction. He called for justice, for the enforcement of the more than 30 treaties the United States had signed guaranteeing their land forever. The nation's hope rested on two pillars, the law and their principal chief, John Ross. Ross, only 1/8 Cherokee by blood, but wholly Cherokee in spirit, was a brilliant politician. He believed with every fiber of his being in the power of the American legal system. He lobbied in Washington, he wrote letters, and he took their case all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1832, in the landmark case Wister v. Georgia, the court delivered a stunning victory. Chief Justice John Marshall declared that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign political entity and that the laws of Georgia had no force within its borders. It was a moment of absolute vindication. The law had spoken. But the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, a man who had built his career on Indian removal, had a different view. He famously reported to have said, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it."
How do you save a people who refuse to be saved? This was the question that tormented Elias Boudinot and a small, influential minority within the Cherokee leadership, a group that would become known as the Treaty Party. It was led by his uncle, Major Ridge, a revered warrior who had fought alongside Andrew Jackson, and his brilliant, firebrand cousin, John Ridge. They were not fools or cowards. Like Boudinot, they were wealthy, educated, slave-owning planters who had once been the fiercest advocates for Cherokee sovereignty. But now they saw a different reality. They saw their people being brutalized daily, their land stolen, their families starving. They saw the relentless, unstoppable tide of white encroachment and knew that John Ross's strategy of legal and political resistance was a noble fantasy. Their logic was brutal and cold. To stay was to die. To resist was to be crushed, scattered, and annihilated with no land and no compensation. The only path forward, they argued, was to make a deal, to salvage what they could from the wreckage. They believed that by negotiating a removal treaty, they could secure money for the nation, new lands in the West, and a chance to rebuild their society away from the corrupting influence of the white man. It was a horrific choice. To voluntarily give up the sacred land of their ancestors, the land that held the bones of their dead, in exchange for a chance at survival. It was a choice between a quick death and a slow, agonizing one. They chose what they saw as life. This put them on a collision course with Principal Chief John Ross and the vast majority, over 90% of the Cherokee people. Ross argued that their land was not for sale at any price, that to sign a removal treaty was to validate Georgia's illegal actions and to surrender their national soul. The Cherokee Nation became a house divided, a war of words and ideals fought between two factions who both claimed to love their people. Boudinot, forced to choose, resigned as editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, stating that he could no longer give the people what he believed was false hope. He began to openly advocate for a treaty. In December of 1835, the moment came. The U.S. government, frustrated with John Ross's refusal to negotiate, announced it would sign a treaty with any Cherokee representatives it could find. Boudinot and the treaty party saw their chance. They gathered at the Cherokee capital of New Echota. Only a few hundred Cherokees, out of a nation of over 16,000, attended. It was a ghost council, with no legal authority from the Cherokee National Council or its principal chief. But to the United States government, it was enough. There, in defiance of their own laws and the will of their own people, Boudinot, the Ridges, and about 20 others put their names on the Treaty of New Echota. They sold all remaining Cherokee lands east of the Mississippi for $5 million and new territory in the West. Elias Boudinot knew exactly what he had done. He was not naive. Standing before the handful of people who had gathered, he is said to have declared, "I know that I take my life in my hands in signing this treaty, for I know that there are those of my countrymen who will not bear it. I have done my duty to my God and to my country. I can die, but the great Cherokee nation will be saved." He saw himself as a martyr, sacrificing his own honor and life for the future of his people. But to John Ross and 16,000 other Cherokees, he was simply a traitor who had just signed their death warrant.
The bargain was struck. The treaty, despite furious protests from John Ross and a petition signed by nearly every Cherokee man, woman, and child, was narrowly ratified by the U.S. Senate by a single vote. The Cherokee people were given 2 years to leave their homes voluntarily. Elias Boudinot and the Treaty Party, true to their word, led a small group west to the new Indian Territory. They began to build new lives, believing they had escaped the coming storm. But the storm they had unleashed followed them. The vast majority of the Cherokee people, loyal to John Ross, refused to leave. They stayed on their land, clinging to the hope that a miracle would save them. The miracle never came. In the spring of 1838, the 2-year deadline expired. President Martin Van Buren ordered the U.S. Army, under General Winfield Scott, to begin the forced removal. 7,000 soldiers descended upon the Cherokee Nation. Families were dragged from their homes at bayonet point, with no time to gather their belongings. They were herded into filthy stockades and concentration camps, where disease and despair began to claim the first victims. And then began the march. In the brutal heat of summer and the freezing cold of winter, 16,000 people were forced to walk over 1,000 miles west. This was the Trail of Tears. It was a procession of death. Starvation, exposure, and disease were constant companions. The official records are cold, but the personal accounts are hellish. They speak of mothers burying their children on the side of the road, of the elderly and sick collapsing and being left to die. By the time the last of them staggered into the new territory, over 4,000 people, a quarter of the Cherokee Nation, were dead. Elias Boudinot, already settled in his new home, heard the news. He had to live with the knowledge of what his signature had wrought. Did he save the nation? A remnant had survived, yes. But the horror he had claimed to be preventing had happened anyway, and it had happened with the full legal sanction of a treaty that bore his name. The cost of his pragmatism was a landscape of graves stretching from Georgia to Oklahoma. The survivors who arrived were not a grateful people. They were a ghost of a nation, their hearts filled with a grief so profound it was poison, and that poison was aimed squarely at the men who had signed the treaty. On June 22, 1839, the reckoning came. The Cherokee Nation had a law, the Blood Law, which made the selling of tribal land without the consent of the National Council a crime punishable by death. That morning, 3 groups of men, acting as executioners of that law, set out. They found Major Ridge and shot him. They found John Ridge and stabbed him 29 times in front of his wife and children. And they found Elias Boudinot. He was supervising the building of his new house when the men approached, asking for medicine. As he turned to get it, they struck him from behind with knives and a tomahawk. Was this justice or was it murder? Was Elias Boudinot a far-sighted savior or an arrogant traitor who broke his own nation's laws? History offers no easy answer. His actions directly led to the Trail of Tears, yet without them, would any of the Cherokee Nation have survived the relentless violence in Georgia at all? He made an impossible choice and paid for it with his life, leaving behind a question that haunts the American story. It asks us what we might do when faced with the choice between our sacred principles and our own survival. It's a question for which there is no right answer, only the cold, hard ground of consequence. History rarely gives us clear heroes or villains, only flawed people facing impossible choices. What do you think of Elias Boudinot's decision? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you believe the most important stories are the ones that challenge us, consider subscribing to continue exploring the complex truths of the past.